Guys, I'm having connection issues. This is Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Welcome to tonight's radio show where hopefully you can hear me and Dr. Bailey, we're about to have a wonderful conversation about her book that just came out, Cold Times. Now, the title of our radio show is The Inconvenient Truth, which she reports on in this book. The grand solar minimum is upon us and begins to decline. The world returns to the cold cycle as it has for the past 800,000 years. We refer to this as the Ice Age, which we live in. And the grand minimums involve Arctic cold, crop failures, and social catastrophe. And her big message in this book is that, guys, you didn't cause it. No one can fix it. No carbon tax is going to help this problem. All you can do is prepare. So I want to welcome Dr. Anita Bailey. Dr. Bailey, can you give us a little background on what brought you to this point? And welcome to the radio show.
Hi, Diamond. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be on with you and your listeners. Well, I suppose I can credit Robert Felix with getting me pointed in the direction. Although for most of my adult life, I had been involved in some level of preparedness, typically because I lived on a farm. And you just have to do that because sometimes the weather goes bad or you have to get a supply in of something that is seasonal. And if it's not in then, you just don't have it. So I can credit Robert Felix with opening my eyes to the risks of the climate getting colder over time. So I'd say that's the principal source of my direction.
That's interesting that you say that, because last night I did a little research into your the books you've written, and I went back to one of the earlier books, which brought me back to 1997, How to Live Without Electricity and Like It. And this is the same time that Robert Felix's book came out. And for all of our listeners, I want to tell you that Anita Evangelista, which is her old pen name, she has a bunch of preparedness books. How to Live Without Electricity and Like It, Backyard Meat Production, How to Grow All You Need in Your Own Yard, Your Meat, Eggs, and Milk Garden. And more importantly, we're talking about a true Renaissance woman here. She has a book on the woman fencer, and she did research into hypnosis, all over the map and all interesting and important topics. And I want to thank you for your work here that I was really unaware of, but most importantly, the culminating work here of Cold Times. Now, what was it that Robert Felix, did you read his book? What sparked you into this preparedness action?
Yes, it was his book. And over the years since I read that, which is, 20 years now, it became increasingly clear to me that the weather was changing for the cold. And it's challenging when what you're thinking you see is different than what the mainstream and the vast majority of people are telling you is happening. And there's no doubt that the weather was getting a little bit warmer before, but as we can see, we've had a shift to the cold side that's fairly significant and getting more significant as time goes by.
Let me jump in here.
Okay.
I'm going to just read the consideration in the beginner book here, which I think is wonderful. John Michael Greer is the quote. We're not discussing the end of the world. We're talking about events like those that can be found repeated many times in the histories of other failing civilizations. That said, my guess is that some of those discontinuities are going to be harsh ones. And those who brace themselves for serious trouble and reduce their vulnerability will be more likely to come through in one piece. And I think that this is really a wonderful cumulative statement describing the information in this book. This book is not about fear-mongering. It's not about conjecture. We're not making things up. These are not new theories. We are using historical documentation of the past climate cycles coupled with a multidisciplinary approach to science to come to the conclusion that our climate system is highly variable. It is never linear. It goes up and down, and we are at the cusp of a drop-off. Would you agree with that statement?
I would absolutely agree with that. John Michael Greer has a rather unique outlook on things. He was a peak oil global warming guy. I believe he still is. But his viewpoint is very feet on the ground. And he's found that people have a almost religious faith in the concept of progress. That as we go forward through time, things get better and better and people adjust, and technology in itself has the capacity to save us from whatever should come. And when he presents the idea that technology is not our savior, technology is only a tool, and things can go bad that can't be fixed by technology, he's usually greeted with a lot of skepticism, even from people who believe the things that he believes. And that viewpoint made me think about how great was my belief in technology. It certainly is something that surrounds all of us, and everywhere we look, there's some human-made built environment that separates us from the real world, from nature, from the environment, from rain, snow. And I think that disconnect has fed into our belief that we're somehow immune from weather. And it's a secret belief. I mean, nobody wakes up and says, I'm immune from the weather, but we'll leave our house without a coat when it's cold out because we know we're getting in our car. And when we get out of the car, we're going to go in somewhere where it's warm. And yet that's almost a practical denial of physical reality. It's cold out. And if your car breaks down, you're going to have some real serious trouble, especially if we have these terrific snowstorms and you happen to be out in one without your jacket and without some good hiking boots. So, yeah, that's about where I am on that.
Well, we can just bring this into current events then, Dr. Bailey. Let's start with the storm that hit the Northeast just a few days ago, leaving 1.7 million people without power, revealing the fragility of the infrastructure in America, not only North America. We saw it happen in England just days ago with the beast from the east. And they have multiple infrastructure failures with water mains breaking. Now, these have happened throughout the years, but what we're seeing is an additive effect. We've never seen water main breaks to the tune of 60,000 in the southern U.S. in a single event like we did this year. And if what we're predicting, this is only the taste of the beginning, these infrastructure failures are going to continue, and that is really going to burst the bubble of those people who rely on the technology that's going to not save them. They're going to wake up call, so to speak, because what's happening right now as we're recording this video up in New England, Winter Storm Quinn, which left record amounts of snow throughout Montana, South Dakota, and Saskatchewan just 2 days ago, doing the same thing to upstate New York. The places they predicted 8 inches of snow got 28 inches of snow. Places they predicted 10 inches of snow got 22 inches of snow. And the power lines are down, the trees have fallen, and there were 350,000 people without power this morning before the storm. So I think what we're going to be seeing is a wave of people waking up to the fragility of the infrastructure in these changing times. Do you think that that we'll see what I'm predicting?
I think it is happening now, and your listeners can attest to that. They're listening because something in them says this isn't right, and things are not how they say it is out there. So these are the people who are awakening and looking around, comparing the world of reality with what they're being told is happening. And reality trumps what you're told every single time. Great challenge we're going is first challenging the assumptions that other people are trying to put in our heads, and why they're beating the global warming drum and twisting things so that it supports that boggles my mind. I don't have any reason except perhaps that they don't want to see it, or they're not permitted to see it because of obligations they have elsewhere. But coming to the conclusion that things really are changing is really the first step for getting prepared for it. If you don't believe it's going to happen, you won't prepare. Your turn.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing, Anita. The new reality, let's call it. And let's just jump into your book so we can get through the entire text in the next 4 weeks. It's 12 chapters, so we'll just dive into the first 3 tonight, and then we'll go to the next 3 chapters next week. And the first chapter in your book, Cold Times, you can get it Octoritas Publishing, LLC. I mean, you can get it on Amazon, but we're going to provide a link to you guys from the radio show to get the free shipping, and I believe it's $14.95, Anita. Can you tell them the easiest way to get the hard copy of the book right now and the digital copy? So maybe if they want the digital copy, they can follow what we're talking about as we go.
Yes, the digital copy is on Amazon.com. It is a Kindle book. It's $8.95, and they should deliver it right away. If you don't have a Kindle e-reader, you can have it delivered to your computer, your laptop, and download the Kindle reading app. So it's very portable. You can put it on your cell phone if you want to. So you'll have it with you. So in those odd moments when you have a couple minutes to scare yourself by reading it, it's handy. The online version, the website to go to get a hard copy is www.Octoritas Publishing, and I'll spell that. It's AuctoritasPublishing.org/specials. And that should take you right to your Oppenheimer Ranch Project specials page where you can pick it up for $14.95. Free shipping. Okay. Well, I'll just move right along then. When you think about the future, we need, in order to get someplace, we need to know where we're going. And before we can trace out a map to where we're going, we need to know where we are. And that's sometimes when you accept that the weather's going to change, things might get bad, you need to look at your own surroundings and your environment and your supplies and determine if you're capable of coming through something that could be potentially deadly and very difficult. Now, I'm not just talking about one storm, because what we have right now is terrifically bad. Most everything. I'm talking about weather permanently, so that these kind of storms and events get progressively worse, longer, more severe, and hit wider areas. Now, it's not just the cold that can be problematic for us. Cold can kill you, there's no doubt. But would you agree with that, Diamond?
Yeah, the grid down scenarios are a definite nightmare. But like your book states, history teaches us the mistakes we are going to make. Now, unfortunately, we're not taught this in school. We should be being taught this as a child throughout our adulthood so that we can learn from our mistakes in the past. It seems like it's an intrinsic faux pas of humanity to not learn from their mistakes. As I get older and wiser, I'm definitely learning from my mistakes. And when I was younger, I tend to disregard them. It seems like that a major portion of the population, when you tell them...
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Yeah, it just seems like the majority of the population is unwilling to hear the bad news. When you tell them about GMOs, they're like, I don't want to know. When you tell them about the coming cold, I don't want to know. Well, you certainly would want to know if you're going to be starving and the population is going to be experiencing global unrest and you're not prepared.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I don't want to know either. But I think it was Ayn Rand who said you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And so for the average person living in average times, not paying attention to a lot of scary things that are less than likely to affect you is a good thing. I don't worry about falling off a roller coaster. I never think about it except for just this very moment because I never get on a roller coaster. So there's a built-in thing in our heads that says, if it's not a problem, I'm not going to deal with it, I think. And it's like the caveman sitting in his cave. There's no saber-toothed tiger trying to get into the cave right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. If it tries to get in, then I'll handle it. But that thinking comes from a place of strength. That caveman knows how to deal with the threats in his environment. Most of us now don't know how to deal with even weather. You can see that on the East Coast. How many people at the last moment panicked and ran out and cleared the store shelves because they didn't have bread in their house or they didn't have food that would be edible without popping it in the microwave first? My guess would be millions of people. And that is terrifying. Now, this snow event is going to be an awakening for some of those people. For others, it's going to be the Zen slap. You know that old teaching story from Japan. The young student goes to the monk and asks him, what is Zen? And the monk slaps him across the face and walks away. And then the student, confused by that, goes to another monk and asks him, what is Zen? And the monk stomps on his toe and walks away. And he goes to the third monk, you'd think he would have learned by now, and he asks him, what is Zen? And the monk punches him in the nose and wanders off. Well, that Zen punch, slap, kick, stomp, that's the Zen slap. That's the moment when you interact with reality at its very most visceral level. It's real. You can't ignore it. It's right here. It's right now. And for a lot of people, I think on the coast they're having their Zen slap moment where they say, I have no food. There's no water. I'm freezing cold. My kids are crying. They don't have their iPads. We have no entertainment. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So It's hard. It's hard. Just like the student getting punched in the nose, it's hard. What do you think?
Well, it's amazing that every dead ancient culture had its technology. The Romans, the Egyptians, the Mayans, and more recently the Minoans and the Romans. I mean, we're talking thousands of years of history. None of these cultures are around anymore. And there's good reason for that. And it's because of the blinding of the societies to the technology. They think they're taken cared for. The problem is, now I'm a rock climber. I know that every link in the chain is one that you want to eliminate, because when you get too many links in the chain, death is imminent when you're rock climbing. So you want a minimum amount of gear between you and your belayer, because that's less things that can fail. We're at a point in society where the delivery chain has thousands of links. If one of them fails, it doesn't get delivered. If you don't now have food in storage to eat, you will go hungry. So the delivery chain, the reliance on technology, there are so many things that can go wrong. And we're just talking a tiny little snowstorm, which goes away in a few days, destroying deliveries for weeks at a time, and this increasing as descendant grand minimum. So how it unfolds is anyone's guess, but the supply chain is being affected now because it has too many parts in the cog that can fail. How do you feel about that idea, that the simile with rock climbing?
Oh, that is wonderful, and certainly that gives you a very clear mental view of life and death, the reality risk of being on a rock face with nothing between you and being a splatter than whatever is holding you on to that. That's very intense and focusing. And when you leave that place, you come away with that focus. And because it is so intense, it forces your brain to organize itself around that concept. Complexity equals fragility. The more complex something is, the more things can go wrong with it. And most of us know that, especially if we're more than 40, 50 years old, you can look at the cars today. Oh, they're fabulous. They're you hop in and it purrs and the heat goes into your seat and you're warmed up right there. And it drives real stable, and you can put it in 4-wheel drive, and it's wonderful. But you can't repair that car at home. If you can change the oil, you're lucky. It has to go on electronic devices that read the engine. If its little electronic brain goes out, it's dead in the water. Many cars are set up so that if the oil is low, the car stops itself so it won't damage the engine. You think of cars from the 70s and 60s. Man, you could repair that car in your backyard. It'll keep running no matter what's going on with it until the engine gives it up entirely. You could hit a cow and all you get is a ding in your bumper. It was a different mindset then. And because of the wonderfulness of technology, we become blinded to the fact that it's out of our hands. It is completely out of our hands. Whatever happens to the grid, we can't fix that. Even if you're a worker who repairs the lines, you have a maximum physical capacity. So the grid goes down, you're just in the same place the rest of us are, with your freezer melting and whatever you have on your shelf being what you're going to eat. So, yeah, it's a challenging situation, just getting your brain to the place where you're willing to acknowledge that this is not a viable system for the long term. You mentioned the Romans. The Roman roads are still there. There's aqueducts, some of which still carry some water. In 2,000 years, what will be left of our civilization? Certainly not our building structures, because they need to be repaired constantly. Our roads, 10 years without any repairs and our roads turn to potholes, and another 20 years and they'll be gone. we're really very blinded by our technology. And there's that normalcy bias.
The only thing that will be...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that the only thing left in a 1,000 years, if our society is wiped out, will be our trash dumps and the plastic containers that our lazy society threw in billion-ton piles and live. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And that's kind of scary, isn't it? Some really fine quality old plastics.
You described in your old plastics. You describe in your book the key concept of this coming cold, the grand solar minimum, whatever it is. I don't believe that it's going to be the initial cold that really sets us over the edge as a society. It's going to affect, the cold is going to affect crops and humanity locally. But what I see is what you just referred to, the grid failure. There has been statistical analysis on our grid infrastructure. There is no way we can even fix it in time in a large enough capacity to prevent a grid failure from happening from a solar outburst. Now, NASA, NOAA, and worldwide governments are aware that our sun is weakening, and they're also that the Earth's magnetosphere is weakening. And that means that if any major solar event comes off the sun, which happens regularly, X flares happen at regular annual intervals, there's always an X flare. And at some point, the grid is going to go down. The cost of fixing the grid is in the trillions of dollars. It would absolutely bankrupt the world. So there's almost no way to fix the problem currently. And humanity is unaware of this. If the grid were to go down forever or for a long term, that would mean the Stone Age instantly. No work, no school, no deliveries, no more food, no more electricity, no more phone, no more Oppenheimer Ranch Project in the morning on YouTube. What's the YouTube?
Yes. And which of those would we miss the most? Would it be the food, or would it be the fact that we can't contact our loved ones who live out of state? We have a normalcy bias. Things are the way they are, and we're accustomed to them. And somewhere in the back of our little reptilian brains, we're saying it's always going to be this way. I've got it. Everybody's got it. So that is a natural resistance to change. Chris Martenson at Peak Prosperity just recently wrote why people change, why they make a change in the way they live or whatever in their thinking. He said one of those reasons is insight. And this is something that you're promoting with your Oppenheimer Ranch Project, with your reports, the other people who are doing Grand Solar Minimum information, Adapt 2030, Ice Age Farmer. They're trying to share their insight. They're trying to make it so that our brains will accept things are changing and get us ready to prepare for that. Now, the other reason Chris Martenson mentioned was pain. Pain is another thing that'll make people change what they're doing and the way they're thinking. Those people in the Northeast are having some pain right now, and perhaps their thinking will change. Now, they may not know that there are resources like Oppenheimer Ranch. They may not know. They may not know where to go to find out, well, what if it's like this next year? What am I going to do? Now, thankfully, there's a lot of preparedness stuff on the internet and a lot of preparedness books, and any preparedness is better than no preparedness. So that's I keep my fingers crossed. That'll be a good thing that the people got the Zen slap, they got the pain, and they're going to come out of their normalcy bias. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that the prepper resources are real. There are thousands of them. There are local prepping groups in every state, community, and county throughout the entire globe. In fact, a gentleman stopped by today, a fan of the channel, Scott, who was traveling to Michigan from Arizona. and he helped out build some raised beds. But he told me he was heavy into prepping 20 years ago, and he got married and all stopped. But now he's come full circle. He actually has something to prepare for. Back then, he wasn't preparing for anything in particular. He just wanted to be ready. But now he needs to prepare because he sees the signs. And so there are going to be a lot of easy resources on preparedness on the internet. If you just type it in, prepper, prepping, how to prep. And your books, I mean, you started 2 decades ago writing about preparedness. Additionally, you even have college degrees in preparedness, which I find to be amazing, and you to be the foremost authority on preparing. When it socially, mentally, spiritually, there are a lot of aspects to think about. It's not just putting beans in a bucket and getting a good water supply. How do you feel about that, the spiritual aspects and the mental preparing?
Absolutely right. One of the biggest challenges for many people is that their spouse or partner isn't into the concept or won't entertain the concept even of getting prepared, or can't believe that things could go wrong, or even believes it but can't handle it. This is a real big stumbling point for a lot of people. One partner sees it, the other partner won't, or can't. If the spouse isn't mentally able to adjust, there's different options, and one of those is gentle information. You can't bash somebody over the head with this and imagine they're going to accept it. The resistance will grow. But I'll tell you what my mother used to do when we were kids. And she wasn't trying to create preppers or anything. She was simply trying to figure out how us kids would react if something went wrong. So she would say, okay, we're sleeping. What if there's a fire? What do you do? And of course, being kids, we'd come up with some nonsense. And she would say, well, what you could do is break out that window and climb out and go over to the neighbors and see if you can get help. Very simple thing. Now, this is probably 60 years ago, 50 years ago when she asked me that. And I still remember that because it got me thinking, what if there was what would I do? How would I react? And so the early programming, and the same thing, we're at the supermarket. If you get lost, what would you do? And, kids don't have any idea. But the programming there was, well, you go to the clerk and you say, I'm lost. And then the clerk helps you find your mom. So in the same way, with weather like this, a family can sit down and say, well, what will we do if it snowed like that here? Would we go to work or would we stay home? Will we have a snow day? Honey, what would you cook? And either spouse can ask who's going to do the cooking. What if the power's down? What if there's no electricity? How do we cook? Maybe we ought to get a camp stove. They're pretty cheap, less than $100. Then we'll be able to cook no matter what. And so you can make a gradual progress toward getting prepared without traumatizing a reluctant spouse. Now, if your spouse is really mentally fragile, that they just can't handle it, it's possible to go ahead and do prepping for everybody in the family and just not include the spouse. To me personally, I don't think that's a good approach because you end up concealing something from your spouse. So that's challenging. Now, if your spouse is actively opposed to preparing, there may be deeper issues there. If they're honestly, seriously opposed to buying house insurance or having health insurance, well, then they may have a philosophical viewpoint or a religious viewpoint that says it's somehow immoral to prep. You should have known that when you got married to them. But if your spouse is getting in the way of prepping and doesn't have some kind of reason why they don't want to prep, then we may be looking at some power disparities in your relationship where they're using that as a point of contention to assert their authority in some way. There may be deeper relationship issues. I think of that in the same way I think of golf. You know, the thing where you take the sticks and you go out and hit the little ball across a grassy field. Golf. I'm not into golf. I really don't even care about golf. I know people do golf. And if my spouse dearly loved golf, I would not say we're not doing golf. I would say, okay, honey, you like this. I want you to be happy. Let's go do some golf. And I'll grit my teeth and I'll go do it. And I think your average spouse who has a good relationship, if their partner wants to prep and the spouse really doesn't think it's anything worthwhile, will just grit their teeth and say, honey, it makes you happy. And it probably costs less than golf. So go to it and enjoy. So you need to consider your skill level as well. Are you capable of doing the things physically that you might have to do? For instance, if your car breaks down in a snowstorm, can you walk a mile to wherever the next store is? Can you walk in the snow? Do you have boots that you can wear? So your general fitness is a factor. The best fitness exercise for somebody who's been in a cubicle or has a sedentary job is just walking. Easiest thing in the world. If you are not wheelchair bound, get up, get out and walk. Aim toward half an hour a day or an hour every second day. And in a month, 6 weeks, you'll have lost weight, you'll feel better, you'll breathe easier, and it has cost nothing but a little bit of time. So one of the things we need to look for is that capacity to adapt to change and still keep going. Whatever change comes in, if you don't have the mindset that you're going to plow your way through it, then you won't. So that's that mental approach. What do you think of that?
Well, I was just thinking, listening to you, about 80% of the population are living in major cities. And if you're one of those people that are near population centers and you sit down to really think this out about getting prepared or maybe changing your lifestyle, the first thing that hits them is like, how the hell am I supposed to move with, I don't even have enough money to get a root canal. Fall right back into that brainwash mentality where they're just going to watch TV and go to work and everything's going to be fine. How do the people that think that they're financially stuck, if you're in a population center, it is absolutely the worst place you could be when things like this start unfolding. I mean, we see it happening now with when the Super Bowl is won and when sports teams win, there is massive looting just for the heck of it. What happens? Stuff hits the fan and the looting is for real. Most people are very concerned. So they're living in fear while pretending there is no reason to live in fear. So what do we say to the people that think they're not financially capable of making this change? What do we say to them?
Well, this is a big issue mentally more than it is financially. And I know you won't believe me, you folks who are financially feeling the pinch right now, but there are things that you do that wastes money. The habits of smoking. No offense to you smokers, but it can be an expensive habit. Getting your nails done, going to the hair salon, the gym membership. And exercise is good, but you can do that for free. You don't need a gym to exercise. Cable TV, one of the worst. Suck down hours and eat your brain. There's many ways you can acquire extra money, but it's not really money. Money's kind of an excuse because there are people who move all over the country with little to no money. And I don't mean just living in their car. If you own property, you have an asset. If you don't own property, you don't have a financial burden. You've got probably rent, but you don't have something that you have to pay taxes on or you're stuck with. So you really have to assess your situation. Look at it very closely. Sit down and see where the money wasters are and where the ways to do those things so that you're not spending extra money. Do you buy coffee every morning on the way to work? How much do you spend on that? You can't make coffee at home? I know it's inconvenient, but that convenience costs you. And we pay a lot for convenience in our world today. Most folks are in debt. Most folks can't come up with, what was that latest report, $400, $500 for an emergency? This is a serious problem. And some of that is because the people they talk to and ask these questions of are living in major cities where rents are exorbitant and taxes are unbelievably high, and you can make an income of $100,000 and just barely scrape by. There are places in the country where you can live very well with a small income. I'm in the Ozarks. Diamond, I think you're in a rural area. And for a lot of things, you can grow them yourself. You can make them yourself. And once you don't have to deal with office politics and wearing a certain kind of gear and what have you, your expenses drop off dramatically. Before I retired, I spent $600 a month in gas getting to my job. $600 a month. Can you imagine that? That's insanity. And yet that's what I had to do to get myself from the home to the workplace and back home again. Where I live right now, $600 a month could buy me a really nice house because I am in a rural area. So you have to look at your situation and look outside the box. There are ways to do things. Acquiring property in rural areas doesn't always mean plunking down cash. A lot of people are willing to trade or barter. If you own a home in the city, how about trading that for some property in a rural area? If you're just trying to get out of the city, you don't need an elaborate house. Everybody wants a big, beautiful house, but it's possible to live in a fairly decent mobile home, used, or a trailer, or other facility that'll keep the rain off your head while you're getting the funds ready to make the kind of home you want, or build a secure storm shelter or whatever. You need to be creative with that. And don't forget, if you have relatives who live in the country, talk to them. They may be willing to part with a small piece of land that you can acquire from them over time. They may know somebody who's willing to sell an older place that needs some TLC for next to nothing. Just you have to get outside the current system, because the current system boxes you in, and I hate to use rhetoric, but you really end up kind of a debt slave. You can't get out of it because you don't have enough money, and you can't live in it because you're not making enough. And yet you got to live somewhere. What do you think of that, Diamond?
Well, I'm opposed to the empire model of slavery, of indebted servitude, where people work their entire life, all of their living hours until they're about to die and they get to go home to die. That model of servitude that is being developed through crony capitalism and the rat race to get ahead, and the biggest car and the biggest house and the most heat, and it's all inane and stupid. So for the normal human that wants to live and experience life and nature and the planet and the universe they live on, you have to break away from those false narratives. Now, if you think you don't have any money and there's no place to go, you haven't been looking in the right places. You need to change your thinking. The Worldwide Organization of Organic Farms is a group that has access to all the organic farms across the world. You can literally pack up all your belongings into a backpack and go. You don't need a single penny except to get to the first farm. And then from there, you would be trading your time for free food and housing. On top of that, there are caretaker and estate property caretaker estate planning type groups where you can become caretakers of estates in areas that are rural. There's a guy at my road here. He's taking care of 6,000 acres, the Behr Ranch, Behr, the guy who owns the paint. And he has a whole house for his entire family, an entire farm, barn, thousands of acres of horses, and he takes care of the ranch. That didn't cost him any money, and his entire family lives on a 6,000-acre estate. So you have to start thinking outside of the box. We have opportunities, Worldwide Organization of Organic Farms website here at Three Canyons Permaculture Ranch, where I'm doing this show right now, where you can come out in the summer and camp and work, and we'll feed you. And it's a fun time where you can learn and build community. This is the way you need to be thinking. You need to change your thinking, the stinking thinking that you need the new watch or the new Porsche or any of that, because true happiness is not in the ego. It's giving. It's giving yourself to humanity. And that's true, what I believe. Can you speak more to the spiritual aspect of the need to change your thinking in these times, Anita?
Oh, heavens. This is a challenging area for me because everyone's sense of spirituality differs. There are conventional religions, traditional ways of doing things, and each group has a different emphasis. You look at the Amish, say, and their emphasis is on family and building family. And at the same time, they also work toward community goals. So the people get together, and as an assumption of their purpose for being in the world, they promote their group. And as also another feature of their religious beliefs, they don't like to be highly visible. They want to be plain. They want to be not an attention getter. So here are people who are working on a spiritual level who, unless you're living in the area where you see them go by in a buggy, you don't see them. And yet their communities are healthy. The people in them are clever and skilled and can live in a setting that some of us would feel pretty uncomfortable with, say a wood-cooked stove or something like that. And there's no great wave of depression spreading through the Amish. It's simply not a feature of the way they live, and that comes out of community. So you have your spirituality tied into your community and the way you live, and your interaction with the earth becomes part of that spiritual experience. I believe it was St. Francis some hundreds of years ago who said, well, it could have been somebody else, but it said that preach everywhere in all that you do and occasionally use words. So he was saying, live the life that your beliefs express. so that when someone sees you, they see your beliefs. Making the change out of our culture, coming out of our Western culture, and looking toward a future where things are quite different, means oftentimes changing from living in the built environment, the concrete and the steel and the manicured front lawns, which are all very nice things and can be quite attractive, and there's an energy there. But when you go out into nature, you become a different person. You are absorbed in and by that to expand and become part of this piece of land that you have. You have 500 acres or 6,000, like your friend. That is a piece of yourself. When I was younger, I was raised in Los Angeles, and I heard about people who knew their land so intimately they could tell if a branch fell off a tree from hundreds of feet away or something happened on the other side of their property, because they were so attuned to it, they could sense when something was different. Coming from Los Angeles, where your surroundings are this little space that you're in, your car, your living room, you don't have that connectedness. And I first felt that on a previous farm that I lived on. We only had 11 acres at the time, but I knew that land. I hate to say like the back of my hand, because it's such a cliche, but I could tell if an animal had gone across there that was unfamiliar because of the way the grass was disturbed. So you have a whole different sense of what the world is and your place in it that speaks to that level of spirituality. What do you think about that, Diamond?
Well, I just recently moved down here to Three Canyons Ranch in southwest Colorado. We named the ranch because there's 3 canyons that you can access right from the behind the ranch here, and only through our property, which makes it unique. But as we got to know, there's about 100 families in this valley, religions, creeds, and sects. Some Christian, non-religious, some Native American, all different types of people. Preppers, they all have greenhouses. They all grow different crops or raise different animals. And we all get along in the sense of that we all are providing for ourselves and for each other. So it was very quick to become friends with everyone, regardless of their viewpoints, because of our eggs. And because they had something that they want, joy. And now we're trading with people that grow onions. Other people have raspberries and other people do grapes. So there's a lot going on in the valley. Apple trees. We have an orchard that we're together as a whole community in the valley. If anything were to happen, we would support each other without even having to have a community meeting. It's just assumed. And some people who get in accidents in this area that are tourists, because 90% of everyone that comes through here is a tourist, they immediately are helped by every citizen. It takes a long time to get help from the authorities. So often in the newspaper, there are these letters that come in that are like, we cannot believe the preparedness of the community in that area. Everyone hunts and respects the land, and the mindset out here is exactly as you spoke of. You really get to know your surroundings, have a different idea of what life is about in these settings. So it's not a scary thing to embrace. It's a completely different way that you have to live your life, but it's going to be important to change the way. Coming from a major city where I was in academia and where I grew up, I used to think the way that the mainstream media wanted me to, that everyone's divided in a group, a political group, a religious sect, a color, a creed. But I quickly learned, attending a university in the middle of North Philly, that all those ideas were mostly BS. And that humanity as a whole is a kind-hearted group, and we've just been led astray. Now, Anita, we're about to go to commercial in a few minutes. So if you just want to sum it up, and I'll take it from there when the music starts.
Well, I guess what we're looking at is a change of weather, a change of mind, possibly a change of location if you're in one of the areas where things are getting worse, and aiming toward becoming a little more focused on how you can fulfill your needs without going
Enter
outside,
into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
That's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. It's going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax, let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, this is Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, back at 9:01 p.m., hopefully still on the radio. We have some connectivity issues. I can't hear the commercials coming on or off, so I don't know if you can even hear what I'm saying. But because I'm good at talk, I'm going to continue to talk. And as we enter the second hour of the radio show, which I have been assured is being heard by you people out there in the radio sphere of Revolution Radio, we're going to be talking about her third chapter in Cold Times, which is titled simply enough, place. And I'm going to read the first paragraph. The most effect of your primary preparation for the cold times ahead is where you live. Clearly, keeping warm will be an enormous part of the process. Preparation and protection from weather extremes for us, for our livestock, for our food stores and our crops figures into this very heavily. Commonplace modern homes and trailers will fail in the time to come. So the sooner adjustments are made for the coming intense cold, the easier transition. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this includes how you prep and how you prepare your food for long-term storage that you're going to be saving. So I'm sure that Dr. Anita Bailey, who has a degree in preparedness, knows a lot about the best ways to save food in your place. But start off this hour, I want to talk about the difference between those people who are going to be deciding to prepare where they stay in place if they're in a major city, what they can do maybe to survive and thrive if things get bad, as well as those that are moving to rural areas to avoid the global unrest aspect of what is coming eventually. Dr. Bailey, can you talk about what I just introduced?
I lost you there for a second.
Dr. Bailey, could you please discuss with our listeners the difference between those that are staying in place in populated areas, their preparedness, versus those in rural areas that are trying to avoid the global unrest aspect of this?
One of the biggest challenges, if someone simply cannot move for whatever reason, is getting your facility, your place, your supplies in so that you can get through the rough first stages and possibly bad weather. Now, in my opinion, and reality is going to come and teach us whether this is correct or not over time, there are certain areas that are just not going to be viable. And you mentioned those earlier, urban areas. If you're living in a high-rise apartment, this is not a situation that can carry on if technology is not with you. You can't get water up to the higher levels of an apartment without pumps. And if the electricity is not working, the water's not coming up there, which means you have no water to drink. And how are you going to flush? In 3 days, your environment becomes unlivable. So ideally, someone is not in a high rise. They're perhaps in a suburban area. Then your challenge becomes uniting your small community around you, maybe your street, your cul-de-sac, your neighborhood, the folks you know, into a cohesive community. You need to have people who are willing to stay and work together for the common good. And if you don't know your neighbors, you don't know if those people are there. So your first step right now, maybe tomorrow, is to go out and introduce yourself and shake a few hands and see what kind of people are living around you. Additionally, aside from the obvious food and water supplies you should be putting in as quickly as possible, you need to be able to form a community defense. And that is a way to separate yourself from the larger city area that is perhaps going to be chaotic if things turn bad quickly. You do need access to fresh water, and this can be as simple as setting up rain barrels and helping your neighbors to do it so that everybody doesn't have to come to you for their water. And, of course, that capacity to grow food. Most suburban areas, you can have pet rabbits, and rabbits are food. Chickens are noisy and they're sort of problematic, but nobody looks at a little bunny and says, that's not a pet. You keep your rabbit in a nice cage and keep it clean, and your female bunny and your male bunny can't produce a litter of 8 to 10 babies every 3 months or so. And those babies will grow over the course of a couple months to 4 or 5 pounds each, and that's a meal. And I know the idea of turning a bunny into a meal is pretty traumatic if you haven't done it, but if you're hungry, you'll do it. You might grit your teeth and you might cry and you might feel absolutely terrible, but when you're eating that delicious rabbit, you're going to have a slightly different idea. And that's, to my mind, that ties in with the spiritual stuff that you were talking about. If you have animals and you provide them with a good life and plenty of food and a safe environment, and when you're ready to prepare them for the table, you kill them quickly and humanely, that's better than they would have in the wild environment where they can be torn apart by predators while they're still alive. They had a good life, they had a clean, quick death, and then they feed you. And so you can do that in a neighborhood, suburban type of setting. Pigeons are another a potential food source, and a lot of people will keep pigeons as pets and let them fly around the area and pick up their own food, come back and raise some young pigeons, and those young pigeons are called squab, which for many, many hundreds of years was considered a delicious delicacy. So it's a food source, and the pigeons will keep raising squab throughout the spring and into summer, and you can eat. Growing food in a suburban setting means converting your lawns into a garden area. And some communities will not allow you to grow edible food in your front yard now. That's a homeowner association issue. If things turn really bad, I can't see the homeowner police coming around and saying, you got to rip that tomato plant out. It just seems impossible to my thinking, but then I don't live under a homeowner association. A really excellent book that can help someone who's going to live in a suburban environment is called A Failure of Civility: How to Defend and Protect You, Your Family, Friends, Neighborhood, and America During a Disaster. It's an excellent book. A lot of resource there. It is very I'm not sure. Writers may have stopped publishing it, so you kind of have to get a secondhand copy. I may be wrong on that, but I know it's hard to find. But if you can find it, it's outstanding. The authors are Garand and Lawson. So there is that. Now, in your suburban setting, now is the time to begin storing additional foodstuffs. If money is tight, when you go to the supermarket, instead of getting 1 can of corn, get 2. That adds an additional 70, 80 cents to your bill. And don't get some junk food to make up for it. You know, don't buy the chips. If you desperately must have potato chips, buy an extra bag of potatoes. It's about the same price as the chips, and you can make a heck of a lot more chips out of that bag of potatoes. It will take time and it'll take skill, but these are things that are part of the living experience of being alive in the world, is being capable of doing something and being willing to put in the time for it. In your urban apartment setting, you can store food and water, but I would encourage you to be looking outside of that environment, so that if things suddenly do go bad, if the power goes down and there's no reports about when it's going to come up, if the looting suddenly starts in, you can get yourself out of there to a hopefully pre-planned location. And that's where you need to have those friends in the country or somebody you know that's out of that urban area. Urban areas are intensely complex and intensely fragile as a result. You don't want to be in a fragile place when the trouble comes down. What do you think of that, Diamond?
Well, Dr. Bailey, I would agree with you about the urban situation. Anyone in an urban situation should have a bug out plan to get out. The sooner, the better, and to have a pre-planned location to go where they know you're coming, because the people might shoot you where you think that they know you're coming if it's really bad. The second thing I wanted to corroborate is the rabbit idea. So I believe that it's survivable, this entire event, in the suburban areas, through the rural areas, if you do have good community support. That being said, all these laws being passed where you can't have wood burning stoves, you can't have gardens in your front yard, are really detrimental to communities learning how to be self-sufficient. And it's really interesting that the powers that be are making that the way it is. But in a suburban environment, having a male and female rabbit that aren't breeding is really the ammunition you need. If you have several of them, if anything bad happens, you immediately start breeding rabbits. And a friend up the road here went from 4 rabbits to 8,000 rabbits in the first year. It's not hard to do, and if you get the skill on skinning them and cutting them, it takes seconds to clean a rabbit. You can save the pelt. The pelts are amazing. And rabbit is delicious, just like you said. And if you live in a rural area, they can eat your grass. So there's not a lot of food you have to supply these animals, just green living things. Additionally, prepping in the suburbs, I would also suggest if you live close enough to a place they sell grain for farms, typically called a commodities broker, you can buy a bag of wheat for $5. It's a 50-pound bag. If you can't afford that, I don't know what you can afford. You can afford a latte, but a 50-pound bag of wheat will grow a lot of wheat, and you can mill it and make bread if need be. It's dried, so it's easy to store. And I want to touch a little bit about storing things. A lot of people are storing things in these plastic food-grade buckets. Now, one of the things that occurs during these grand minimums is extreme weather and flooding, which leads to rodent outbreaks. And rats and mice can easily chew into these containers. So being an expert on preparedness, Dr. Bailey, what is it we should be storing our important foodstuffs that we're looking for 10 years or longer storage for when the event does occur? What should we be storing them in?
You can acquire metal trash cans that are rodent-proof if that's a problem in your area. The larger metal trash cans will hold some of those 5-gallon buckets that you've got your grains and your flour and what have you in, and that'll keep the rodents out. Additionally, there is on YouTube, there's a website. I can't remember the name of the website, but the title of the YouTube is The Best Mousetrap Ever. And it truly is. It is basically just, they call it the walk the plank mousetrap. And you set a little peanut butter on it and put it on the edge of a 5-gallon bucket into which you've put some water and a little ramp up to the little teeter-totter on it. Mr. Mousey walks up there and smells the peanut butter and walks out to the edge and falls off into the water. the little plank is on a hinge so that as the mouse approaches the peanut butter on it, it simply falls in. Now, drowning mice is not a nice thing. It would be nicer if we could dispatch them more quickly. But if you've got 10,000 mice, you need something that's going to get a lot of them and reset quickly. Mice that are caught in your bucket trap can go out onto your compost pile and end up feeding you later. Or if you have snakes or whatever, I think some of them will eat mice that are dead. So you can make use of them in a way that doesn't waste their little lives without them having to eat all of your grain. Have you heard of that kind of trap?
I absolutely have, and it naturally occurs here on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. In the summertime, we kill dozens of squirrels that everything into our water bins. Mm. This small plank in the 5-gallon bucket, I've seen that on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I can confirm.
One thing I in the last hour. Dr. Bailey, you were saying?
I can confirm that trap works very, very well. We had a terrible mouse infestation last fall, and I'm not entirely sure why, because we hadn't really changed very much. But those little traps, we've dispatched hundreds and hundreds of mice with them and really cut down the problem here in our barns. So they work. And after your initial investment, you really don't have any more investment except for a little peanut butter every time you reload the trap.
Now, let's say the event is unfolding and we've prepared properly. Everything is stored in our shed or our garage or wherever. We have hundreds of pounds of grain and beans, we've got canned goods, we got sugar, water, oils, candles, all the basic necessities. And now the grid hasn't failed, and the government is coming to round up the resources. And they're going to be stopping by your house to take their percentage of your stockpile of goods, because they know people have to prepare to prevent the government from taking half of your stuff.
Well, the first thing, and this is something perhaps the prepared person should have done to start with, is not tell anybody they have the stuff. When you go to buy, try to buy it in such a way that you're not leaving a paper trail that somebody can follow back to you. So don't use your credit card, use cash if you can. The concept of caching, putting supplies out somewhere else so that you know where it is and nobody else does, is an option in a situation like this. Now, if things really turn that bad, I would not be surprised to see your local authorities saying, look, you got extra and we got people who are hungry here. You have to give us some. And we all know that when that kind of situation occurs, they play on your humanity and your kindness and try to guilt trip you. But at the same time, those people who are collecting the supplies are probably taking their percentage cut off the top too. So it's never a simple humanitarian issue. You have a right, a duty, and an obligation to keep you and your family alive, to provide for those people who are near and dear to you. You don't have an obligation to keep the government functioning. That's their job. You pay them. You have paid them for decades to keep themselves functioning. So try not to be guilted into feeling like you're obligated there. Store your things in several different locations. You mentioned having your shed filled with all these great things, and that's fabulous, and it's a wonderful feeling of security and safety, and I know we're going to eat no matter what. And then you get the giant snowstorm and the 8-foot snow piles up on the roof, and when you come out, your shed is flat, and so are all your supplies. That's why you don't store everything in one location. You need a good couple weeks supply in the house, maybe 6 months out in the shed, and 6 months somewhere else on your property, or in your storm shelter, which is something you should have. You can, if you have a little piece of land, all you have to do is look around. You're going to find wonderful places where you can provision for a just-in-case situation. Think, too, fire is a common, almost commonplace calamity that can occur. You see fires on the news all the time. Apartment building burns down, somebody's house burns down. If we are in a truly bad time, fire sweeps through. There's big fires in Kansas right now, I think. Fire sweeps through and takes your house. You need a backup place. And that might be that little trailer you hauled out into the woods for hunting. And that can be a place where you provision as well. Your metal trash can in there and fill it up with all kinds of things, or acquire your grains in what are called number 10 cans. Those are about a gallon, roughly. Holds about 5 pounds of wheat, 4 to 5 pounds of wheat. You can acquire your stuff, and that will last for 20, 25 years if it's kept cool and dry. So in case you don't eat it, your kids will have something to eat. So there's a lot of options, but once again, we're back to you got to be creative here, and don't let the people who failed to plan think that they have a right to your property. It's yours. Sometimes you got to be creative with how you defend and protect it, though. How's that sound to you?
Well, I'm a big supporter of the cache or the cache idea, having these caches in secure areas, buried and hidden, and splitting up your supply in multiple places. That's a good starting point. All having the backup plan for things like sweeping fires, that in the future there is no insurance, there's no one coming to help. You need a backup place. So I wanted to talk about strategic planning on your what is it do strategically to decide where we're going that will make less and less of these things a burden. How can we put ourselves in a place where I believe I am, that almost no one would even bother getting to you for good? How do you strategically line yourself up to do that? Where do you begin? I know the historical information and I know geologic information. You provide it in the book. How did you come to your conclusions?
Well, I was primarily looking at historical indicators. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when people came into this area, they came in with a clear idea of what was a safe place to live. It had to be out of any kind of riverbeds. It had to be where the wind came through in the summer so that it would cool it, and where it was sheltered from intense rains and severe winter weather. So part of the difficulty with being strategic today is that we've really lost that orientation to physical reality. We're raised to think we need a big house with a lot of windows. Well, a lot of windows means a lot of lost heat during a cold winter. So there's changes we have to make in our expectations of what is desirable, because sometimes desirable doesn't equate to survivable. So the conclusions that I came to in the book, how I came to that, was looking at the natural environment around you. You certainly don't want to locate yourself downwind from a nuclear reactor. And that's just now. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be in the spillway from a dam. You don't want to be within perhaps 100 or 150 miles of a military base or silos, nuclear silos, or volcanoes. So the whole process of looking at what's a good area means looking for a place that doesn't have intrinsic problems beyond whatever is coming in with the weather. And that takes some looking around. I was talking to somebody who was interested in northeast Oklahoma, which is a lovely flat area with some good land and some wide open spaces. And that's a good thing if everything remains the same. But if the weather turns nasty, some awful cold is going to come sweeping across those plains and make living right on the land surface subject to that wind pretty uncomfortable and possibly not survivable. So you also need to look for an area where you have a water resource. Rivers are good if they're small, and perhaps even seasonal rivers, because you don't want a navigable waterway right next to your front door, because people will be on that. And even today, if people are out canoeing or whatever, and they want to make a phone call and they didn't bring their phone, or they have to go to the bathroom, they'll a lot of times just walk up to somebody's house and ask to use their facilities. Probably with tourists, that's not a big thing, but you sure don't want to be that guy if things are going wrong and you don't know who's coming up and down the river. So avoiding that main waterway. You need an area where rainfall is going to be adequate to grow crops if you can't pump water up. You need land that is arable. So the Arizona desert is probably not a good place to look at, even though it's got other qualities, such as being away from population centers. Let's see. I'm thinking too of country that is defensible. That is an area which is where you're not going to be immediately visible as people drive by on the roadway or walk through or whatever, where you can have, what is it they call it, curb appeal. You want to reduce your curb appeal so that when your property is seen, it doesn't look like there's a lot valuable up there. It looks less than inviting from the roadway. And this is so contrary to the way we think now. We want a pretty house with a lot of flowers and beautiful landscaping and a nice lawn. Well, that's called a target in a difficult environment. So if you want to be a target, you need to be sure you've got plenty of defensive capability, but it's a whole lot easier not to be a target. I think I'm running out of thoughts here. What do you think, Diamond? What would you add to that?
Well, I could add that a one-way road is a good idea. You get to know everyone on the road, and there's usually no reason why anyone should be on your road that doesn't live on your road. The one-way in, one-way out idea, or the end of the road idea, or living on the margin of populated areas where it goes from grid to off-grid in a national forest where no one can approach from one direction for hundreds of miles, so that you can control and see one direction at all times. It's a lot easier to monitor one flank than 360 degrees. I wanted to also point out that the predictions are, and in past grand minimas, that these extreme weather events typically occur in the same weather belts that they occurred before. So if you're thinking of moving to Tornado Alley or any of those places where hurricanes or tornadoes, or the upper plains where there is blizzards and high winds, those would all be bad ideas, because according to historical evidence, the weather events there are going to become greater and more catastrophic. If you're in an area that has major hail, it's only going to get bigger and worse. We're seeing that an uptick in the last 6 months worldwide of increased hail size to record levels. Additionally, lightning strikes worldwide will increase, and historically, tens of thousands of people died from lightning strike. And we just saw someone die from this new northeast storm. I just saw the headline today, I think in New Jersey. And multiple cows died in Australia yesterday from a single lightning strike. And there are many deaths. Deaths are on the increase from lightning strikes throughout Australia this summer. So I believe that those areas that experience heavy thunderstorms and lightning in general are another bad idea on places to be. How do you feel?
Yes, you definitely would want to avoid areas that already have known problems. Now, that doesn't mean it couldn't change. It's possible that an area that is too dry now might become very pleasant and quite livable later, or something that's very nice now might become too dry, too cold. So that's that adaptability. You make your best decision based on the best information you can come up with. And if it turns out you were wrong, then you make a new decision. Keep your options open so that you can keep adjusting, because this is survivable. People survived throughout all of the other little ice ages and even the major glaciations because they adapted. If you happen to be a farmer in the Alps in Switzerland and you saw that glacier moving 100 feet a day towards your house, you didn't imagine you were going to sit there and continue to do your farming. You packed up your stuff and you moved because you had to. You adapted. And that's what people did. And those are our ancestors who did that. We're here today because those people survived and they made enough plans to keep their children alive, and their children kept their grandchildren alive, and so on down the line until here we are. And we have lived in an age of such incredible wealth, historically unprecedented wealth, and really unbelievably good weather, that we've come to think that that's normal. But really what we're moving into now is closer to what has been normal for humanity throughout the ages. Difficult weather, hard to grow crops, the necessity sometimes to move when you don't want to, because if you don't move, you die. And we can adjust. We can adapt to this. Our ancestors did it, and they didn't have cell phones. So if they could do it, we can do it. We can do this. What do you think, Diamond?
I think the key is community. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people that think them and their buddy are going to go off into the woods and make a teepee and they'll be fine hunting deer. But it's not going to work like that. You need a group of people to survive this. You need to organize your local community and know that they're having changes, or if anything were to happen, that you guys would work together to survive and thrive. You're going to need a group with different, like in my community, we have a surgeon, a retired nurse, a doctor. We have all types of heavy equipment operators, plumbing and wells, master carpenters, farmers, innovating in the valley ourselves and surviving and thriving because we have all the necessary ingredients here: food, water, air, wood, that's pouring into the valley. We don't have to go outside to get it. So this is a really good strategic location. We have a great community. So we're pretty much prepared here for anything. We had landslides last year during the heavy rains in 4 places that cut the road off. Many of us didn't even know because we stay here for several days at a time without going out to town until we saw the heavy equipment. And we were like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, you're cut off. We didn't even know. So that's the type of preparedness you need to have so that even when the stuff does hit the fan, it doesn't matter. Nothing in the area that I am will change if the grid goes down. It'll just be another day without electricity. That will be the only difference here. We'll know what to do. And I really fear for the worst for humanity because so many people are unprepared.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you there. And there's an interesting subtext to what you were saying. You're talking about the people around there and the equipment operators and surgeon and what have you. You've gone out and you've met those people. Now, maybe you didn't purposefully mean to, but you met them. And because you met them, you know what capabilities your community has. A lot of us in the city and even folks out in the country, they know a handful of people and they don't care to know anybody else. And because of that, they don't know what their capabilities are. They don't know if they can get along with the guy who lives next door to them. And you, like you said, that community is so critically important. For folks who have the lone wolf idea, I'm going to take my backpack and go up to the woods and live in a cave or a teepee or make a shelter out of leaves and sticks. By all means, give it a shot. Try it right now. Take a weekend, go on up there, pack your food or whatever and give it a try. See how it feels. If you can bring down a deer with your, knife or whatever your security is, and you don't get into trouble with whoever owns the land, bless your heart, you may be able to do it. But odds are pretty good you won't, because you gotta sleep sometime. You've gotta sleep, and when you're sleeping, you're not defending yourself, and a bear comes into your camp and eats your foot. Life works like that. You have a community around you. You have alarms. Maybe somebody's got a dog. There's a dog or two. You've got automatic alarms, and that bear never gets in. So one thing I suggest people do to understand where they are and to really understand at a gut level what they need to do is, it's kind of a little radical, but Friday evening, maybe even this Friday evening, go to your junction box and turn off your power and leave it off until Sunday evening. And just see what happens in your life. One of the first things is that you're going to worry about your refrigerator, and you should, because some of the stuff in there may go bad. Actually, 2-3 days, the stuff in your freezer might thaw a little bit, but it'll probably be fine. But if it went on for a week, then what? You're going to have to eat all that ice cream in one day. At the same time, you're going to find out how you deal with it getting dark and there's no light. What about if you can't recharge your phone? How do you get entertainment? Do you need entertainment? Can you sit down and read a book? Do you have alternative light? Something you can light up so that you're not stumbling around the house in the dark. You understand what I'm saying? It is, if you want to do something, you need to try it out. See if you can do it. See if you can stand to do it. And that's the folks who are going to retreat to the wild woods. If they've never done it, it's a fantasy. You have to do it, and if you can do it, and some people can. What was his name? Brad Anger or Angier, who wrote How to Live in the Woods. He was one of these people who just made it his life to go out and learn to live with very little in the environment that gave him everything he needed to live. And it can be fun if you do it as an adventure, but if you're out there and it's pouring rain and everything you own is soaking wet and it gets cold and you can't start a fire because you didn't put some sticks and kindling aside for it, that's how you learn that that's not going to work. It doesn't work. Historically, it was extremely rare for someone to live on their own. They were known as hermits, and they were usually brought food by somebody else. And sometimes they were mountain men. But even mountain men came down from the hills and got supplies and traded their skins and their furs for things they needed. So yeah, it can be quite an issue.
Well, let me touch on that you just mentioned. In Hermit, an undergraduate school, I used to go rock climb down there and also just go on the Wissahickon Creek. It's part of Fairmount Park, which is one of the biggest wild areas in an inner city in PA. But this Hermit Lane, I looked into it, and just like you described, during the Dalton Minimum, the homeless people in the Philadelphia area, it was so cold, they needed a place to live. So they went up the Schuylkill River and would dig these caves into the mud, into the floodplain, straight into the bank. And this was where the hermits lived. These lone homeless people that dug these mud caves to stay warm during the Dalton Minimum. It's just amazing that that's what a hermit is. Now, these hermits only survived because they were on the outskirts of the city and people were bringing the scraps and things like that. And that's not going to be happening in the times that are coming, the important moving forward, even I believe you have it in the book, is really a good sense of community. That's going to be really important moving forward. Is that community for a part of the strong defense? You want more than one set of eyes looking infiltrators that may be coming. If everyone is prepared or willing to be prepared when the time comes, that just is all the better as far as your defense. Actually, in my community, we all live on the river. We all have our own section. We all protect it, and that's the way it should be. The capacity to grow food meaning in greenhouses, vegetables and fruits, and live animals, small livestock, is critical, because if the infrastructure fails, these are all going to be key to survival. This also includes weapons. I think weapons are crucial, and for those people that are unwilling to own weapons, you need to be in a community where there are people willing to own weapons. So these are my key points as well as yours. And I'm sure there's more we can discuss as far as preparedness when it comes to land. Let's talk about some land we acquire, and maybe we'll want to build some resilient structures for some really crazy events, like a secondary emergency structure. You touch on it in your book in a number of ways. Could you give us a little synopsis of think?
I have two thoughts here. One is the resilient structure for extreme cold and snow loads. I mentioned in there that living in a conventional stick-built suburban home or even a really nice mobile home snow weight is going to squash them. It's simply going to squash them. Light, fluffy snow weighs on average about 7 pounds per cubic foot. So a foot of snow, which in the current storm is not much at all, weighs about 7 pounds, okay, in that 1 foot by 1 foot area. Heavy wet snow weighs about 20 pounds per cubic foot. So on a average size, maybe even small size, 1,000 square foot roof, 12 inches of heavy snow, that's a foot of snow, weighs about 20,000 pounds. That's 10 tons over your head. Buildings we make today can't tolerate intense snow loads. They just can't. And the warning signs that you're in a building that's going to be having a big problem in just a few minutes is snapping or popping or pipes suddenly leaking, windows or doors getting stuck or hard to open, sags, leans, the walls start shifting. You need to get out right now. And this is advice for anybody in the Northeast who's listening to us. If you see that happening, it doesn't matter if it's a blizzard outside, you get your coat on, get your family together, and get out. If you have neighbors, get over there, because that house is ready to fall down. Overbuilding is the solution to this. Overbuilding. Use huge pieces of wood, 2x6 wall uprights on 12-inch or 10-inch or even 8-inch centers, and keep building in a very strong way with a peaked roof. Peaked roof sheds snow more readily than the flatter roofs that we're familiar with. But my favorite, always my favorite, and I desperately want one of these, are the ancient structures called dolmens, D-O-L-M-E-N-S, dolmens. That's effectively a structure made from large slabs of rock. Now, people all over the world made these dolmens thousands of years ago. In the American Northeast, when the settlers came in, they believed or imagined that the Indians had used these dolmens, these hardy stone structures, to store their winter supplies in. And the Native Americans told them, we don't store our stuff in there. We don't even know who built them. So they predate the knowledge of the local populations there. And in other areas, there's no oral tradition that explains what these things were. Well, if you look at them like somebody who is thinking about the cold times. What you're seeing are storm shelters. You're seeing something that was built to withstand high wind, that was built to take perhaps lightning strikes without transferring that energy to the people inside, and that could withstand tremendous loads on it, snow, ice, whatever. So the people of the past had the experience of needing these things, and we may need them too. If your average person out in, say, Oklahoma or somewhere where there's tornadoes can buy a small version of a dolmen, which is made out of concrete, and they're precast. They're small, like I said, maybe 8 foot square or 8 foot cube, something like that, which can be just put in the ground, and it comes with an air vent and a hatch, steps leading down inside, and it's effectively just a little mini dolmen that can be dropped in the ground. In our area, they run around $3,000. They'll dig the hole and bring it in, drop it in the ground. You've got yourself a little mini dolmen that will withstand tornadoes and hurricanes and stand up to the typical kind of wild weather we get in the Midwest. Now, whether that's going to withstand tremendous depth of snow, I wouldn't want to be in one and have to dig out through 10 feet of snow. And they certainly would not be a place you'd want to be in if it was below the water table and a flood was coming through. But at the same time, they have the possibility of protecting you from severe storms and the kind of lightning that we're looking at. And don't overlook caves. Here in Missouri, caves are a feature on many properties. We don't have one. I wish we did. But caves have sheltered humankind as far back as history records. And it wasn't because people couldn't construct other facilities. You look at some of the cave art in the caves in France, thousands and thousands of years old, and those people had a sense of themselves. And they went in probably because it was a safe, natural environment. In the Middle East, there have been rather large underground, what you can only describe as a city. One that I believe went down 18 stories. How long does a group of people have to live in some place like that to keep digging down? There were kitchens, there were communal areas, there were separate living areas, there were places where they apparently grew things underground. There's a reason people went into places like that, and it was because they had to. It's so much easier to live on the surface, and we've done that because the weather has been unusually good, and we've been able to produce a huge amount of food with relatively little effort. How does that sound to you, Diamond?
Well, I think I love all of the structure ideas you talked about. I also like the warning about the McMansions, all the cheaply built stick frame homes that are going to be crushed. We've seen buildings starting to collapse due to some of the heavier snows that happened through Canada this year. In Montana, I'm sure many structures have collapsed, and the structures typically don't collapse until after the heavy blizzard snows and the sun comes out. Like you said, the warming happens, and it becomes almost like a glacier. We got our greenhouse crushed not during the blizzards, but after, during the heating of the snow and the creating of the ice. So that's important. The idea of dolmens in the historic past as being safety structures from things to come, I believe is true. Not a lot of people have the resources to get that amount of rock or have that kind of rock. And a cheap way to do it is to simply buy a shipping container. You dig a hole, you bury a shipping container, you make an entryway. This can be a place where you can put your supplies. You can use it as a root cellar, an emergenter bunker. Many things can happen in a buried shipping container. A lot of people in this area use them buried. They simply paint them with roofing tar, and they should last for hundreds of years underground. You just have to make it. If you live in a south-facing hill area, you just bury it into the hill and make a structure. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The only caveat I would have with the shipping container, if you're going to completely bury it, is to shore up the inside. The walls and the corners of a shipping container can take tremendous weight, thousands of pounds, but the walls are fairly thin. So you want to put in perhaps an interior wooden structure, or if you're capable of welding, weld in some I-beams to just make sure everything holds up, and that'll keep it intact and there and doing the job indefinitely. The typical shipping container is watertight, so you want to make sure you put in a couple of air vents because it's also airtight. And once you've got that in the ground, it is there to stay, and it's a beautiful thing.
Well, I love your take, and I love your safety tips for burying your shipping container. And guys, they're not that expensive. You can get a used one around here for $3,000. Brand new, they're $4,000. And that could be your security link. You could buy an acre of land and bury that, and no one would know it's there, and do it all for about $8,000 in this area, because you could pick up land for $4,000 an acre. So these are just some ideas on how you can make a quick escape spot. But I think it's more important to be prepared and to be ready, because as these events unfold, we're not going to really know when it's going to happen. And it could be instant panic. Everything will be purchased out of the stores within 48 hours. So if you're not on the first wave, you're beat. So it's better to be prepared. And we're going to be prepared by talking to 3 weeks. And next week, we're going to be talking about food, the immediate basics, water, which is essential to life, how to purify it, how to collect it, how to store it, and how to move next to a good water supply. And also how to produce your own food. And I have a little bit of expertise in that area. I've been doing that for a few years now. And it's not that hard to fail and learn. Now, Dr. Bailey, we just have a few minutes here before they cut us off, maybe 2.5 minutes. If you could just tell the listeners, and thank you again for coming on for the entire month of March. It's going to be awesome talking to you for the next 3 shows. Just tell the listeners, if they're interested, where they can get your book, and anything else you might want to plug in the last 2 minutes. It's all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Diamond. You know, it's a pleasure for me to be here and reach out to folks and hopefully get some people doing the thing that's going to keep them alive and keep their descendants going. We don't know what we do that over the long run is going to be the thing that allows us to have descendants. But you've got to keep plugging at it. The book is available on Amazon.com. Also, I believe you'll have a link somewhere where people can find it on octorituspublishing.org/specials. And it does have the material we've been discussing. Once again, you can find good preparedness tips all over the internet. There's a lot of good books. Use your good sense when you're listening to someone. If they're telling you something that seems too good to be true, or telling you buy product X and you'll survive any calamity, you might want to find another source. And I guess that's about where I'm at, Diamond.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Bailey, for joining us. Guys, if you're listening, you can find her links on any of my daily updates on my YouTube channel at Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube, which you can link to from our website, which is at oppenheimerranch.org or 3canyons.org. It's up to you how you get there. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you guys got a good, clear message from us tonight. There were some glitches. I couldn't really hear the commercials or anything, so we're going to try to fix it up for next week. But thanks for listening. That's a boom. Good night, Dr. Bailey.
Good night.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.